Good evening. Let's take our chorus book. Our chorus book, we didn't finish the last chorus this morning, so we're going to do it now to try and keep on track. Shepherd of Love, number 42 in your chorus book. Shepherd of Love. Then if you take your hymn book and turn to hymn number 40, We Gather Together, hymn number 40. In the big hymn book. In the big hymn book.
So you're just backing up doing 40 again.
No. I misunderstood what Jimmy wrote. I was just... rise to number 41. Now thank we all our God. Hymn number 41. Number 42, Fill Thou My Life, O Lord. Number 42. Thank you.
I know this one. My words are right.
I started playing. Your face. I can't think of it while mom is singing other words. Right
So what would have been really cruel is to follow that familiar melody until like the last three measures and then change it radically. Because we'd all be singing this top of our lungs because we know this melody, and then Jimmy would start playing something else and we'd be going, ah.
I knew there were other words.
I did have a couple of problems with words didn't line up.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's
The-
a couple of places where they took a word that has like one syllable and made it into two notes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That was where I tripped.
That's all right. I was tripping right alongside of you there. So,
Well, it's consistent.
all right. Well, we're old school tonight. We actually do have streaming, though. We are streaming, and the stream worked good this morning. So hopefully it's working good tonight. But because of all the changes, I can't cast our TV, and there's other things going on. But that's okay, because I was going to say it's only us tonight, because even though we're streaming, there's nobody else on. So it's just us. And we do have this, and that's what we're going to do, because this is a Bible study. So we're going to study the Bible. So, Isaiah chapter 7. So we finished Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 6, of course, was very interesting because it was Isaiah presenting his call to minister and his appearing before the throne. And then he was going to be sharing with the people God's judgment. And then it switches gears. So we get to chapter 7, and it's a total transition. There's no smooth transition. It's just bang, you're someplace else at a different time, in a different place. Because we were back at King Uzziah in chapter 6, and now in chapter 7, who are we with? Yeah, so Uzziah, we skipped over Jotham completely. We went from Uzziah to Ahaz, and so that's why, again, whenever you study Isaiah, do not expect it to be chronological from beginning to end, or you will get really confused really fast.
Like one of the places at the time, then they put like, instead of chapters, they put like the year it takes place in and expect me to remember.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
was going to say, if without chapter and verse, and you are reading this, and
That's
however it was, you would go, huh?
That's true. And I'm not enough of a Hebrew scholar to tell you how they would show that division if they did.
Well,
That's a good question.
I think the job of assigning chapters is the difficult one. But in this case, it was pretty easy.
Well, that's true. That's true. That is definitely true. All right, so let's take a look. We're going to slow it down here. We're probably going to take 3 weeks to cover chapter 7. I mean, we've been moving through. We've been almost doing a chapter a week, or well, 2 weeks per chapter anyway. We're going to slow a little bit. And I want you to just quickly see if you can tell me why. And I would suggest you go to the middle, just a little past the middle of the chapter. And why might we spend a little extra time?
Well, one of my headings is the sign of Emmanuel.
Oh, that's kind of interesting. What might that sign be?
I looked at that.
Well, we know his birth was heralded by a star. Maybe they're going to tell us that.
Yeah, kind of. There's 25 verses. Half of that would be 12 and a half. Bethany? Oh, haven't we heard that somewhere before? I don't know. Every Christmas for the last. Verse 14, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Beth. What's not his name Beth, but Beth, what are they going to call it? Him? Emmanuel, God with us. And we've got 2020 hindsight. We know that's prophetic. But in this case, it was a short-term prophecy. That was going to then also be a long-term prophecy. And so we're going to spend a little time studying that and see what was going on then. We're not going to get to tonight. We're only going to make it well. We'll see. So let's grab hold and start reading. And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel. There's a lot of names there. Are you already lost? And you have a little bit of an advantage, Cindy.
I do, because recently in Kings and Chronicles about Uzziah, Jotham, and Ahaz. Those are three of the kings that were king when Isaiah was.
And I would suggest that around 1 Kings 15 or 6, I mean, sorry, 2 Kings 15 or 16, you read names like Rezin and Pekah.
I remember Rezin.
Really? How interesting. How did she spell it?
R-E-N.
Okay, well, this is I-N, so close. Interesting.
It might have been Iron, but I don't know. I always thought her as a paint component, resin.
Right.
Her friend Oliver.
And 3D printers now, some of them use a resin, which is a liquid
Yeah,
that it hardens and
so that's how I remember their name. But
yeah, but see, I would call her 3D printer then, like Mrs. Hollywood. So for the rest who maybe haven't studied 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles recently, this is a whole lot getting thrown at us at once. And I will tell you the secret, the key to Isaiah chapter 7, and this is actually going to continue all the way to Isaiah chapter 38. This section, this vision, this historical look, this is a huge chunk of Isaiah. And so if we don't get started right, we're probably in trouble. And so the way we get started right is we want to know the historical context. So I could have gone back and gotten my Usher's Annal of the World's massive book, that Ron gave me. I could have brought that out there. We could have looked at that. But you know where else we can find an accurate history of, Judah and Israel, Cindy?
Back up here. Back up a little bit and you'll find it in Kings and Chronicles.
Exactly.
The Bible tells us quite a fairly straightforward history of both Judah and Israel.
Exactly. And that's why, because sometimes people they look at those books, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. There's some exciting stories in them, but the rest of it they look at
There's
is
a lot of tedious stuff.
yeah. Except that tedious stuff is so valuable when it comes to this. It ties the Word of God together. Exactly.
So you understand what was going on.
Exactly. And so we just read, and it came to pass in the day, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, who was king of Judah. So we're going to stop right there. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to 2 Kings chapter 16. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, because Jimmy slipped out. So 2 Kings chapter 16. And Michelle, I'm going to have you read verse 1, and Beth verse 2, Cindy verse 3, Tom verse 4, Matthew 5, Bethany 6. And Rick, I looked at you and my mind went totally blank. I'm going through every man's name that I can think of, and none of them fit. And Rick, if you'll finish us off, I think that actually is enough, but let me just go back there and double check. 16. 2 Kings 16. And so if we look at 2 Kings 15, verse 38, what we actually see is, and Jotham slept with his fathers. What's that mean? He died, and so they buried him, which is appropriate, with his fathers in the city of David, his father, and Ahaz, his son, reigned in his stead. So that's setting up the context for chapter 16. And let's see. Nope, I think I'm going to have to read at least no, I'll read verse 8 and 9 then. So, Michelle, will you start us out with verse 1?
In the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign.
What? Okay. 2 Kings chapter 16 and read verse 2.
20 years old was Ahaz when he began to reign, and reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord his God, like David his father.
Would you read that last and did not read that one more time?
And did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord his God.
Okay, stop right there. So, remember the kings of Israel?
Didn't do.
They were all the kings of Judah.
Some were good. Some. He was bad
He-
because he did not.
Did not.
was right.
So Ahaz was one of the bad ones. All right, Cindy, verse 3.
But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. Yea, and made his son to pass fire according to the abominations of the nations, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel.
What's this passing through the fire stuff?
That's burned as a sacrifice to Moloch.
Does that just like turn your stomach?
Yes,
I mean,
be pretty hard pressed to offer one of my children as a burnt sacrifice.
I'm pretty sure you would be the mama bear at that point, and you don't get between the mama bear and her cubs. All right, Tom.
And he sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places and on the hills and under every green tree.
Then risen the king of Syria, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to war, and they besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome
At that time, Rezin, king of Syria, had recovered Elah to Syria, raised the Jews from Elah. And the Syrians came to Elah and dwelt there unto this day.
So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant, thy son, come up and save me out of the hand of king of Syria, and out of the hand of the king of Israel, which rise up against me.
And Ahaz took the gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and took it and carried the people of it captive to Kir and slew Rezin. All right, so that's the context. Now back to Isaiah. And by the way, Rick, you did an excellent job there on Tiglath-Pileser. Excellent job. Anytime you come to one of those words that you're not sure of, you got two options. You can ask, but nobody else is going to know either. Or you can just push on through, and you did great. Yes, that's right. So that's the context. And we could look at 2 Chronicles chapter 28, and there's more details there, and you can cross-reference them. But that's the setting. So Ahaz is king. He's not a good king. He's worshiping the false gods. He's sacrificing his children to the god Molech, probably. And if you think back to the first three and 4 chapters of Isaiah, we said that those visions seem to be directed more towards Ahaz's reign rather than Uzziah and Jotham, because Uzziah and Jotham, not perfect, but better than Ahaz. And now this one is real time. Okay, we're looking at, thousands of years in the future, but when he's writing this is real time. This is what's happening as he's writing this. And so Ahaz is the king. And so you have the king of Judah and you have the king of Syria are at some point came up against him, but they weren't able to prevail against Judah, against Jerusalem. So if this is the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee behind me, the Dead Sea about, halfway there to the out to the fellowship hall. And so over here are the 10 northern tribes. You're in the 10 northern tribes, Rick. Back here, we finally have Jerusalem and we have Judah. Over here, we got Manasseh somewhere over here. And And so the king of Israel is those, the front third, or no, I mean the front half. That's Pekah. Yes, yes, exactly. That's where they are. So Judah's right behind them.
Ahaz is the king of Judah. He's down there.
Right. And so the 10 northern tribes came against them and Syria. Well, where's Syria? Yeah, somewhere
Over here,
it's
north
and east. Yeah, and about where Galilee is, I mean, it came down about that far. Syria originally was a part of Assyria. But at this point, Assyria and Syria are separated and they're not friends. Okay, so you have Syria that's coming this way. You've got the 10 northern tribes going that. Although we don't find it here in Isaiah chapter 7, we do find in 2 Chronicles chapter 28 that Edom, where's Edom? It's back where the table is, there in the entranceway. And the Philistines, where are they? Back corner there.
Okay.
Back corner. So they've got people coming from the southwest, people coming from the south, people coming from the north and the northeast. And there's this big river in the middle and a big Dead Sea. They're in trouble. But in this particular case, now there's some discussion. Is verse 1 talking about what's coming or what's already happened? I think it's what already happened. And we can go back to 2 Chronicles 28, and we can find out that this all began in the time of Jotham, where they started to plot against Judah, but they didn't actually bring it to a head until Ahaz. And so these two made their attack and they failed. Why did they fail? That name that Rick said will be very important here. Close enough. He's the Assyrian king. The Assyrian king, and they came to the rescue, only not out of the goodness of their heart. And actually, if you read in 2 Chronicles and a little bit of it in 2 Kings, a lot of the treasures of the temple were chopped up, given to pay the Assyrians. And so now the Assyrians are they're like the peacekeeper. They're kind of staying there to protect the peace, as long as they also get a piece of the pie, And so that's the situation now, but that's the way it's been. So there's been an unsteady peace. But now you have Israel forming an alliance with Syria. There's also some threads of an alliance with Egypt, because Egypt doesn't like Assyria. And so you've got all these things going on at once. And so let's take a look. Let's take a closer look here. That's what's happening right now. So Ahaz, as we know, is the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. He's the king of Judah. Rezin, the king of Syria. And Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel. And it doesn't stand out now because they calls him the king of Israel. But then from then on, when it refers to Pekah, it refers to him as the son of Remaliah. Who's Remaliah? I don't think so.
No.
I don't know who he is. And it doesn't jump out at me, and it probably doesn't to you either. Who's king as, that son of some stranger, nobody knows. What message does that convey?
He's not our king.
It's kind of an insult.
Yeah.
And which rightfully so, because he is still attacking God's protected nation. Okay, yes, he's also a part of God's protected nation, but it's a divided nation now. And so they weren't able to prevail. And again, we can read about that in 2 Kings 15:37 and 16:1 and 2 Chronicles 28. And then, and it was told the house of David. Who's the house of David?
The kings of Judah.
Yeah. So who's being told this? Ahaz is being told this, saying Syria is confederated with Ephraim. Who's Ephraim?
Ephraim, the sons of Joseph, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
The half tribe of Manasseh and Ephraim.
Mm-hmm.
The tribe of Joseph, he had two sons,
Mhm.
so they like.
And so what had happened was Ephraim had sort of become the dominant people group in Israel, like Judah, dominant one in Judah. Oh, wait.
They were so dominant.
And so when you refer to Ephraim, you actually were referring to Israel as a whole. So the Syrians are they're back at it again. They're forming an alliance with Israel, referred to here as Ephraim. And this was the result. And his, now, look at the grammar and try and tell me whose his this is.
I think it's Ahaz.
Exactly. And Ahaz's heart was moved. Now, when we say my heart was moved, we're usually thinking it was moved with, I was thinking compassion, but love is good. Okay. Any of those, yeah, any of those fit. But as we read here, and his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. That sounds a whole lot like fear. And so Ahaz, he's 20 some years old, and these countries are forming alliances, and again, throw into the mix the Philistines, the Edomites, and maybe Egypt will even jump in at some. No, yes, even Egypt will jump in at some point. And so at that point, Ahaz has a decision to make. Who am I going to call for help? Now, one option is who? Okay, I was looking the other way because that's the other option.
Outside his wrong ways in doing that, and said to himself, wow, we're in big trouble. Maybe I ought to do.
But what do you think his first choice is going to be instead?
But somebody in the surrounding area, maybe who's an enemy with one of these allies.
And maybe somebody who helped out before at great cost to the treasury. And so right there, this is where Isaiah steps into the picture. Verse 3, then said the Lord unto Isaiah, go forth now to meet Ahaz, thou and Shear-Jashub, thy son. I'm just going to recommend you can. I mean, that's a choice. I don't know I would recommend it, but that's the name of his son. So you're going to go forth and meet Ahaz, you and your son, Shear-Jashub. By the way, we're going to see another son's name in a little bit, and it's going to be even worse. We won't see it this week, but we'll see it next week. And you're going to take your son, and you're going to meet Ahaz at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. So where and what is this? Well, we can find out a little bit if we jump ahead. So keep your marker here in chapter 7 and go all the way to Isaiah chapter 36. In Isaiah chapter 36, take a look at the headline, of the chapter there in your Bible, and tell me what's going on here.
First invasion.
Sennacherib. Do you remember Sennacherib?
King of
Assyria, yes. And he swept down, coming up against Judah, and he was the world power at that time. So we'll get, I don't know, sometime roughly in 2057, we'll get to this. But what I want you to look at is verse 2. And the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to Jerusalem unto King Hezekiah with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. Does that description sound familiar?
Same place.
Yeah, the exact same place. It's a strategically important place. Why?
Well,
The king clearly spends time there.
Well, that's true.
I'm thinking that the conduit of pool makes it sound like a series of pools and water courses. So maybe a brook or maybe a river or maybe
Maybe a spring,
like that,
maybe
a
the
spring.
Gihon spring. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's in the news every once in a while, even today. So you can actually see this pool today. It's still there. And it was part of the water supply system to Jerusalem. Now, remember Hezekiah built well, actually it wasn't Hezekiah that built it, but they call it Hezekiah, but an underground system of water supply to the city. Isn't that cool? They didn't have that yet. So this was their water supply. If you control their, if you cut off their food, you put a siege around and you cut off their food, they've got food stored. They'll live for a while. It'll get tough, but they'll live. You cut off their water, or maybe you don't cut it off. Maybe you throw some dead cows in it. All right. So this is a strategic place. And it's again, in chapter 36, we'll get to that someday. Back to Isaiah chapter 7, this is where God told Isaiah to go meet King Ahaz and to bring his son. Now, King Ahaz, his heart is moving because he's fearful. And so Isaiah shows up with Shear-Jashub, his son. Could it be important to know what Shear-Jashub means?
Literally, a remnant shall return.
Huh.
That sounds cool.
That does sound very prophetic, and maybe very important to someone who feels that his kingdom is at the stake of at the point of being annihilated. And Isaiah comes along with, "But a remnant shall return." 2020 hindsight, isn't that exactly what ultimately happens?
Yeah.
They go into exile, and then a remnant returns, and then another group returns, and so it's actually good news. And God is going to preserve his nation. Maybe not all that encouraging to Ahaz. By the way, the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field, there's also a lower pool, and the upper is it filled with water, then it would run down to the lower pool. But it says of the fuller's field. What's a fuller's field?
Fuller is someone who processes wool cloth. And I guess they had a lot of wool cloth because they were a nation of shepherds. And it involves washing. So having a ready water supply would be critical to fulling.
Fullering.
I think you say full,
Okay.
to fulling the cloth.
Okay. And if you take a tour over there, they'll point to the fuller's field. Is it the actual fuller's field? I don't know, but it could well be because, again, the pool's there.
Well,
So
it would need a place. Basins and-
Exactly.
and changing the water.
So maybe this is the right place. I don't know. And Isaiah is told by God, and say unto him, the first thing is, take heed and be quiet. Listen and shut up. Now, we might say it the other way first. Shut up and listen. But that's why do you say that? I mean, maybe not in those exact words. But.
Because I want to follow direction.
And if
What
they're
I'm gonna say next is important. So take heed and be quiet.
if they're talking to each other, they're not listening to your instructions. And so this is something important. So God tells Isaiah, tell him to listen, and be quiet. And then he says, tell him fear not. And what do you think Ahaz's immediate first thoughts were?
Why not? It's so danger. Of course I could be afraid.
Syria, Ephraim are forming their troops at the boundaries. You know, a lot of things we worry about really aren't that big of a deal.
Kind of a big deal.
I think so. But God says to tell him, fear not, neither be afraid. And he says, for the two tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and of the son of Remaliah. So this is interesting phrasing. So a firebrand is what? Yeah, a torch. Only this one, it's just the ends or the tail ends of it. And all it's doing is, yeah, it's the end of the torch. It's burned out. There's nothing left but a little bit of smoke. It's been consumed. And that's how God defines the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and of the son of Remaliah. Why? Because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah, by the way, notice that he's not saying the king of Israel. He's not even saying Pekah. He's saying the son of that guy that we don't really know who he is, have taken evil counsel against these, saying, well, what are they planning on doing? Let us. By the way, why are they saying go up? They're up north. Oh, yeah. Jerusalem is mountainous terrain and it's uphill. So no matter how you came at Jerusalem, you had to go up to Jerusalem. And so let's go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us, and set up a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabeal. Tabeal is an interesting Hebrew word. There's an Aramaic form of it, which means God is good. But there's also a Hebrew form of it that means more along the lines of good for nothing. So we're going to set up king good for nothing. That's their plan. They're going to probably lay siege, conquer them, and then install their own puppet king. They're going to get rid of Ahaz. So again, Ahaz is thinking, well, this sounds like a really serious, to be fearful. Verse 7, thus saith the Lord God, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. That's their plans. God says it's not going to happen. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. So Damascus is up here somewhere. They're like capital city. And Rezin was the head of it. If we jump down to verse 9, it says, and the head of Ephraim is Samaria. We know about Samaria, and the head of Samaria is that unknown guy's son. Why? What does this mean? I mean, you can read ahead in each verse and see a little hint, but
saying this whole offensive action really relies on these two guys.
and they're just
Two
guys.
Yeah.
Who's talking? Well,
God,
the creator of the universe, the sovereign ruler,
right.
is saying these guys, they think they have power. Okay, they got that little bitty army. I'm almost picturing, looking down on a war games board, that little bitty army. This is a comparison of God's sovereignty versus theirs. And so he says, verse 8, for the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years shall Ephraim's going to be broken, that it be not a people. What's 65 years?
65 years.
Okay, so all of this is taking place somewhere around 730 BC. Can you think of anything that happens after 730? So we're moving closer to 0, even though 0 doesn't exist. Can you think of any dates that were important in Israel's timeline?
I I don't know the date, but I'm thinking, from reading this, the loss of the northern kingdom.
Okay.
Assyria sweeps down and turns that son of Remaliah into a pile of skulls and cowering slaves,
So,
and then takes them away and leaves a few.
again, depending on the timeline, so 65 years, that seems, let me just, I'll make it easy. So 730 to 722. 722 is the date. That's when the Northern Kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians. 586 is when Judah was conquered by the Babylonians. Those are two really important dates to remember. So but that's only what, 8 years or so? 8, 9, 10, depending on how you follow the timeline and how soon this happened after Ahaz became king. That doesn't sound like 65. I mean, it does say within 65 years, but that's like, within a million years, whatever. Well, yeah, it probably will happen within that million years, but that's not a very good prophecy. So was God's prophet off? Did he misunderstand God when he said 65 years?
No.
Okay.
Misunderstand what he was trying to tell.
Because, and I have to read my own tiny little print that I put in. Let's go and verse 24. Second Kings, mine titles chapter 17, Samaria captured by Assyria. So that may give you a little bit of a clue. 2 Kings 17. Oh, that's not actually the one that I wanted, but that's okay. We'll look at it anyway. Verse 23, I think is what I told you. Or 24. Oh, 24. Okay, 24 actually looks better. So verse 23, let's go ahead and read it. Until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all his servants, the prophets, so was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. So they were removed in 722 BC, but that's not almost 65 years. That's less than 10 years. So let's read verse 24, and then it makes sense. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from Cutha and from Ava and from Hamath and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel, and they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. And if you match that up with the passages in Second Chronicles, you can come up with a pretty good timeline. And you know how long it was from when Isaiah told this to Ahaz? Right around 65 years. Now, why is that important? The people were removed. The Israelites were removed just 8 years or 7 or 10 years or whatever. No, there was a small remnant, but most of them were either killed or were dragged away. But you know what? At that point, you could always say, we're going to go back home someday. We're gonna get our land again.
And eventually, we've seen how God can turn a family of one guy with 12 sons into a whole nation.
Exactly. And so
there were some left there, not very many, at least 12.
But even the idea but we can still go back there because it's just empty. We can go back there. We can reclaim it. Okay, we got to get our act together. We got to get rid of Assyria, but we could do that. And then Assyria comes in and they bring all these people in. And now we have the Samaritans. Okay, the Samaritans, yes, some of them had a little bit of mixed lineage with the few Israelites that were left. But for the most part, they were not Jewish. They were not descendants of Abraham. They were people from scattered all over the place. And at that point, you just say, nope, nothing we can do. When Judah was in captivity, who took over the land and filled it up? It was empty. There was a few, the remnants were there, and the enemies around them would sweep through and steal everything, but nobody took it over. And so they could say, we're going back someday. We'll rebuild. And they did. But 60 to 65 years later, how interesting, isn't that? Within 65 years, I think it said, God closed that door. And so when he told Ahaz, these smoking tails of firebrands, that's all that's left, they're going to be history. They're going to be gone. Verse 9, and the head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. And then this is the crucial statement. If ye will not believe, surely ye shall not be established. Ahaz has a decision to make. Do I believe God? Or do I say, please, Assyria, come and rescue me again? That's the decision. If you don't believe God, God's not going to establish you. Now, right there, doesn't that solve it? Well, we'll see, because what did it say about Ahaz? And he did not that which
Was right.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So that's where we leave it. He's got a choice. And the choice that he makes is going to have serious ramifications on Judah. And you already know the story, and yeah, he makes a bad choice. But verse 10, moreover, the Lord spake unto Ahaz, saying, ask thee a sign. I'll give you a sign. And that's where we're going to pick up next week. Any questions or comments about Isaiah chapter 7?
Well, it helps to get all the and Remaliahs and
Yeah.
Ahaz's straightened out and
Yeah, if we didn't have the historical context of this, that would be really hard to understand. The neat thing is, where did we get the historical context from? Yeah, from the Bible. Now, can you use extra biblical historical sources? Absolutely. That can help, but you don't need it to understand what this means. So
I never really thought about the fact that the son of Remaliah, I've read that so often that Remaliah sounded familiar to me. So I said, oh, it was, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel. And I thought, oh, he was one of the kings. And he was some guy.
some guy.
Well, but you can see kings are overthrown by some guy
Right.
from time to time.
Right.
And then they say, oh, now we will establish this line, and then their children reign, and so on. And you can see how the people could be not very accepting of that, still consider him the traitor's son or whatever.
Right.
I don't know the circumstances,
Right, yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
it's
right.
interesting that even God would name.
Isn't that interesting?
Ooh,
Yeah.
referred to that way by God.
Practical application. Guess what? We still get asked to make choices. Do I serve God? Or do I serve fill in the blank? Peer pressure, mammon, whatever. What was it that Joshua said? As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That same choice is being made today, and we get to we'll learn a lesson from this, but it's, you learn from somebody's bad choices to make good choices. So, all right. I think that's it. We're dismissed. Good study.
All right, how are you feeling?